Hello everyone, Julia here, hello from Sweden and welcome to a new video. In today's video I want to show you my finished book journal. This is a book journal that I was using during first half of 2023 and I already started a new insert for the second half of this year. But this one is finished, so I want to show you a quick flip through of it and will tell you a bit about this journal and also a bit about the books that I read and maybe recommend something. If you are into reading fantasy, especially, then I think you can find something interesting for you here, because I read mostly fantasy and I read 50 books during this first half of 2023, and many of them actually were really good ones, so I just will point out those books that I especially liked, and if you are interested in fantasy, then maybe you can take a note for yourself and make some list of recommendations if you would like to read something from these books. So I have this cover page here, a little collage with some of the stickers from my Etsy shop, and I also made a cover for every month, like a title page for every month. I know that it's kind of unnecessary, but I just wanted to divide the months from one another, that I can clearly see what I read during this month, so I did this title pages for every month, just a little book themed collage, and I have quite many book stickers, so it also was my way to use some of those stickers and do something nice with them. And also in the beginning of every month I included this list of the books that I would like to read during the months. It wasn't a very strict plan for the months, but I just wanted to have this in the beginning of every month, that I have an idea what I want to read, because there are actually really many books that I want to read, and I have a huge list of books that I would like to read, and sometimes I'm just getting a bit overwhelmed and don't know what to choose next. So I did this kind of shorter list of like 7 to 10 books that I can choose from. Sometimes I read all of them during the month, sometimes just a few and was reading also something else. Sometimes also I didn't have that much time for reading, so I read just a few from this list, but this is basically just to give me an idea what I would like to read during the months, and I still continue to do that, and I write this list in the beginning of every month. I have this kind of notepad, my reading list notepad, and I wrote this first list using one of the pages from that notepad, and then I thought that after the month is over I just will throw it away, but then I decided to keep these lists actually inside my book journal, and I think it's just also interesting to see then later when I flip through this journal, just to see what I planned to read during the month and what I actually read. So I decided to keep this monthly lists, and I just attached them always with a piece of washi tape. So this is a title page of January, and this was a first book that I read in January. It's from my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson. It's called Dress of the Emerald Sea. It came out on 1st of January, so obviously it was the first book that I read this year, and it was a perfect beginning of my reading year because I loved this book. It was really great adventure, it's fun, it's easy and quick to read, it's interesting, and I just love Brandon Sanderson and pretty much everything what he writes. This book and 3 more is a part of his Kickstarter campaign that he did last year. Basically like 4 secret project books that are planned for this year. So this one was the first one that came out on the 1st of January for people who backed his Kickstarter. and I was one of those people, so I could read it already in the beginning of January. And then for other people, for like wide public, this book became available then sometime later, I think as an ebook also in January, but later, and as a printed book, like as a paperback or hardcover. I think it came out in March or April, in April I think. But I also got a physical copy of this book from the Kickstarter campaign, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Production value of the books and the price that I paid for them during that Kickstarter campaign is really just amazing. During that Kickstarter campaign, each of these physical books was $40, but the value of it definitely way more. They are an amazing quality with a ton of beautiful illustrations, and every box that comes with a physical book also comes with some additional stuff like a bookmark and sticker and pin. So for $40 you get not only this amazing hardcover book with tons of beautiful illustrations and just beautifully made, but also many other things. So I am really so happy that I joined that Kickstarter campaign. It was like definitely one of the best decisions, because the books are absolutely amazing, the quality of them and also the content. And I loved this book, and I printed out a few illustrations from this book. And when I received an ebook, like a digital package of this book on 1st of January, it also came with some additional materials, illustrations that are also included in the physical book, but it also came with many of those illustrations in digital form and also with some additional digital materials. So I printed out some of those illustrations for my book journal. I really loved the illustrations in this book. The illustrator is Howard Leon, and he did an amazing job with this book. And I noticed that I'm talking about this book already for like 5 minutes. I can talk about Brandon Sanderson really long. So I think I should move on to another books that I read. So yeah, if you like Brandon Sanderson and you haven't read this yet, I definitely can recommend it. It's an amazing adventure, and now it's available for everyone as an ebook, also as an audiobook, or as a physical book. You can order it online in your favorite bookstore. Now it's already available for everyone. Then let's see what I have here. I already don't remember what I read in January. This is in another very good book, a standalone fantasy book, which is kind of seldom. Usually it's at least a trilogy, rather often even more. But this is a standalone book called The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Vaughn. This was the first book of this author that I read. And it was also really great, one of the best standalone books that I've read. It's from an Asian author, so it's Asian-inspired fantasy, and the characters in these books are amazing, and the story in general, it's really just so good. It's a very brutal book in many ways. There are very many extremely violent and brutal scenes, because it's about war, so understandably, but also there are many touching moments, and there are so many amazing quotes in this book that I just wanted to write them down somewhere. I wrote a few quotes here, those that I especially liked, but there were way more that I wanted to write down, so this is also something that I can definitely recommend. Dresden Files are also amazing. I really love Dresden Files, but this is a huge series. It's an urban fantasy series, and I love Dresden Files. That's all what I can say there. It's one of the best fantasy series that I ever read, and this book here, Battleground, it's book number 17 in the series, so that's, I think, the last book that came out. The series are not finished yet, but this is the last book that was published, and in the beginning of January I read this book and I really loved it. Then here I have a mixture of different things. I won't tell something about like every book that I read because it's 50 books, so if I will talk about every single book that will take really long time, so I just will point out those that I especially liked. And it was Dark Matter by Black Crouch, and it also was the first book that I read from this author, but this was really good. It's a story that it speculates on that topic of parallel realities and what would be if we could go to one of those parallel realities where everything is kind of the same like in our reality, but also like in the reality we know, but also kind of different, and like how many of those parallel realities exist and what happens when they kind of merge together and when you go from one to another and things like that. It was really interesting to read it, and sometimes it was kind of a bit difficult to wrap your brain around it, but it's written in an easy way. It's not really scientific or anything, and like it's fiction. It's not a scientific book, it's fiction. So it's very understandable, but some of the things that were happening there looked really crazy and kind of scary. But it was really good. I loved this book, and I also read already a few more books of this author. So this is a title page for February, and in February I was reading Stephen King, as you can see, quite a bit, and this year actually I'm reading quite a bit of Stephen King, not only this year, but in general. I like many of his books, not everything what he writes, but quite many of his books I really liked, and I like his style of writing and also his characters. I think he writes absolutely amazing characters, and most of his books that I've read I actually really liked. This is another Brandon Sanderson recommendation, Elantris, and I was rereading this book. It's not the first time that I read it. I read it first time a couple of years ago, but I have this beautiful leather-bound version of the book with many beautiful illustrations, so I decided to reread it, and that's also something that I can recommend if you like Brandon Sanderson and haven't read it yet. It was his first published book, so it's not as good as his later books, but I think it's really good enough and definitely worth your time and attention. This is a title page for March, and in March, as you can see, again, a few Stephen King books. And also Tolkien. I read Baron and Luthien, and it was really good, but it's definitely not my favorite Tolkien book. My favorite is Lord of the Rings, obviously, but it's far from favorite. It's an interesting story, but definitely not one of my favorites. More of Stephen King, and this is a trilogy actually. I started to read it in March. I read the first one and the second one, and it's called the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, and it's one of his later works, which came out sometime like 2007-8 maybe, so it's one of his later books, and this is something that I also can recommend if you like crime stories. It's something kind of unusual for Stephen King. First book especially, it's a crime story. Second and third, there is some mystery in it, so if you don't like mystery, then maybe you should stop then after the first one, but the first one is really good, and actually the first one was the one that I liked the most out from this trilogy, but in general all three books were really nice. So now we are already in April, as always, the cover page, and this is another one of Brandon Sanderson books from that Kickstarter campaign. That this was a secret project too, how it was called in the beginning, but the title is really not long, and it's called The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. Really long title. And this is something unusual for Brandon Sanderson. It reminded me Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you know this book, then you probably get an idea what kind of book is it. But it's really fun. I liked it also quite a bit. As you can see, I also rated it 5 out of 5, and I liked the first one, Dress of Emerald Sea, more definitely, but this was also very, very entertaining and cool. Cool to read, also very fast, funny adventure, and this one is also about parallel dimensions, kind of time traveling to different dimensions, and it's really fun. So I liked this one too, and also can recommend it to you, especially if you like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, then probably you will like this one. And this card that was inside of the box was the physical book, kind of what the box contains, and this sticker here also was inside of the book as an additional treat that came together with the book. Yeah, so here I finished the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. This is the last book of the trilogy, and I also liked the last book quite a bit. And this is a new series that I started to read this year. It's called Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson, and this is self-published fantasy. And I really loved this book. I think it's really kind of like a hidden gem of self-published fantasy. I think I even wrote it here, yeah. Also wrote it here. I really loved the story, loved the characters. It was very interesting and entertaining to read this, and I definitely will continue with this series. I already read the second book, so the second book is also somewhere here in this journal. And then, oh, this is also the new series that I started to read this year, also self-published fantasy author called Ryan Cahill, and the series are called The Bound and the Broken. And if you love fantasy about dragons and dragon riders, then this is definitely for you. This series are also absolutely amazing. I fell in love with this series pretty much from the first book. It's so well written, so fun to read, and I read already all the books in this series that are available now except the last one, and this is my plan for June. This is another book from Blake Crouch, from the author of Dark Matter Recursion. This one is also interesting, but I liked Dark Matter more, so this one only 4 out of 5, but it's also a very good book. And then May cover, and what do we have here? So here I read a few more of this series about dragons and dragon riders, The Bound and the Broken, and I really loved all the books in the series. I rated them all about 5 out of 5, and I really loved them. And let's see, this is already June, I think. Yeah, that's June. So here I have Stephen King again, and this is a second book in the series about Illborn from Daniel T. Jackson, the second part of this series. And now there are only 2 books in this series, and this one actually came out this year, but it's planned to be a trilogy, so I'm really looking forward to the third book. It's really cool series. Yeah, and I think that's all what I've read. I read 50 books, and also in the end I have this page with my favorite bookshops in Sweden. These are physical bookshops in Sweden that I really love, so I just wrote down some short information about those bookshops. I had this big sticker with a bookshop, and I didn't know what to do with it, and somehow came out with the idea to make this page with my favorite bookshops here. So that's all what I have in this journal, and I have a playlist about my book journal where sometimes I film how I update my book journal, so I will leave a link to that playlist in case if you're interested. And In the second half of this year I'm going to show my book journal again from time to time, so soon, probably sometime in July or August, you will see my new book journal, and I hope this video was interesting for you. I hope that you found some interesting books that maybe you would like to read. And as always, thank you so much for watching and see you in my next videos. Bye!